Ooh. I don't know who this is, and I'm not. All right. Start this a little early. There we go. While we're waiting for our guest today, I think I'm going to do two things for the intro. So basically, today we're going to talk about two separate issues. We're going to talk a little bit about sports for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm going to finish up with a little bit of an intro to our guest today. All right. So last week we had the national championship game, which was between Michigan and last week was basically a wild sports week. So we had the national championship game between the Washington Huskies and the Michigan Wolverines, and it was a great game to watch. Even though I followed it through my friends, it was great to see Michigan, go through a 15-0 undefeated season. That was awesome to watch. And, good for their coach, Jim Harbaugh, even though during the season he got caught cheating, with a sign stealing game, and there's been a lot of controversy. But what's interesting about this coach is one to two of the following things. At every stop that he's gone to, which includes Michigan and San Francisco, he's been a winner. So he spent 2 to 3 years at San Diego State and then left for turning them into a winner. Afterwards, they didn't do so well. Then he goes to Stanford for 4 years against his nemesis, Pete Carroll. Turns them into, after the first year, in the next 3 years, he turns them into complete winners, where they're going, consistently up to 12 wins. After that, he goes to the NFL San Francisco 49ers. They're in the playoffs and Super Bowl runners-up for basically all 4 years of there. Now, unfortunately, he rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And basically, especially in the NFL, he and his general manager didn't get along. So after that last year, before they start, in 2014, for 2015, they didn't do so well, San Francisco 49ers. 2016, they started to go downhill. In 2016, he goes to Michigan. Or he sits out a year or something like that. Does very well. Can't beat Ohio State, but in the last 3 years has finally beat Ohio State. This year, 15-0 record. He's proved everything you need to in the Big Ten in college football. I wish him luck, and I hope he does well at the next level that he's leaving for. But now we're going to get to the fun part. After the playoffs, Alabama head coach Nick Saban decides to basically retire because during an interview, a position coach asked him, how long are you going to be sticking around for, especially at age 70? In exactly the same week, Pete Carroll got fired, the Seahawks coach, who's had a very, long coaching career himself, and Bill Belichick finally gets let go after 24 years with the Patriots, 3 of which were not good seasons. What I'm going to say in terms as a Jet fan is, hallelujah, we don't have to deal with you anymore. Now, as for a football fan, you know what? I sort of grew to like the guy a little bit, even though he's the coach of my nemesis team, of our nemesis division team. But let's be honest, Belichick got caught cheating at least 24 times, over his NFL career. Every single time, even though they had a winning record. This year, he finally got caught a second time deflating footballs. And guess what? even still with deflating footballs, they had a bad season. This was the worst season to be a Patriots fan ever after being spoiled with 20 years, and you could tell with Belichick. Now, as for Saban has been a consistent winner over 14 years at Alabama in one of the premier SEC schools. Kalen DeBoer, who just got hired, is going to be very interesting to watch because now you have to follow literally someone who's better than Bear Bryant. Right now, Saban is the legend, and Saban will be this generation's Bear Bryant. Meaning, no matter who gets hired at that school, they're going to have to live in the shadow of Nick Saban, as Steve Spurrier said, over the weekend. And lastly, it'll be even though Bill Belichick will probably be getting another NFL job, looking at the other two on the TV now, for the next decade is going to be very weird. So now that that's the sports wrap for the week, at least in the football world, now we're going to move to basically the finish of what I started Sunday with Pick Your Brains with Paula. So basically how I felt now in the last couple of days is I've finally not come to peace, but I've gotten a little more accepting of last week's situation. There isn't really much more that you can say to a person because unfortunately, if they don't understand your situation, they don't understand your situation. So, they can try, but then again, they don't know until they live the situation. So and one more thing on social media. In a guided mental health discussion, there are a couple of things that we both need to be aware of. Everyone who says social media is the reason for people's mental health, yes, there's a ton of research to back that, and I do agree up to 25%, of some people's situations or more could and can be social media, but that doesn't mean social media is bad. Social media has some good uses to it, but it can also have some bad uses. So unfortunately, you take the good with the bad with it, and most of it is about the content creator's vision for what he wants his audience to see. If he wants to sell a product or a service, and then he feels the need to flaunt everything he has in his life, he or she has in their life, that's what they're going to do to create the sale. If you look at somebody like me, for example, my mental health going back for years, unfortunately, had less to do with social media and more to do with, the community that I came from and my upbringing. Some of it starts with parenting, but not all parenting. A lot of it was living in a very affluently rich area. So basically in Cross River, where a lot of families on some level, probably have 1 to 2 parents making high 6-figure incomes, the kids get to afford, nice things through their parents. Once you get to the out of the college stage, depending on where they're working, you could very well, be within the community and you could get yourself a full-time job, through your parents or through your connections or through your friends. Unfortunately, once you move away from these type of communities, as I did, it becomes a lot more difficult. That was what Paula and I were discussing on Sunday. Paula and I were discussing what happens when you move away from that type of community. Well, to be honest, first and foremost, you're not going to get the same job opportunities. Second, if you're smart, or eventually, and you think college is the answer, college will also tell you the same thing. A lot of it is going to be about connections and networking. Something that colleges never they do a fair job of explaining this, which isn't all their fault because probably no one bothers to ask. Most jobs after the entry level, once you get out of college, unfortunately, are filled through networking. Go figure what that actually means because networking is different to everyone. But leads me to my point. The thing that's been hardest for me is navigating with autism. So what I'm about to introduce today is basically an article that's titled Indiana Resource Center for Autism. The article here is choosing the right job for people with autism or Asperger's syndrome. So to set the stage today for Christina Farinaucci Roberts, and this will be talked about a little bit throughout the whatchamacallit, we're going to discuss four categories of jobs. Four categories of jobs that are not good for people on the high function or low function spectrum. And then the next category and that's table one. Table two is good jobs for visual thinkers. Table three will be good jobs for non-visual thinkers, and table four will be jobs for nonverbal people with skills. I'm probably going to rewrite this article at some point because I think it'll be interesting. So let's start with the abstract. Okay. So in the abstract, I'm just going to skim this. Jobs need to be chosen that make use of the strengths of people with autism or Asperger's syndrome. Both very high and low function people have poor short-term working memory. Now, mind you, this article was written in 1999, but they often have a better long-term memory than most normal people, or what we would call non-autistic. And I will introduce this in today's episode. I cannot handle multiple tasks, table one. So basically, in this table, for a high-function autistic like myself, most of these jobs don't make sense, and you can't really, unfortunately, create a life on them. But very simple jobs like basically casino dealer, taxi dispatcher, airline ticket, future market trader, air traffic controller, receptionist, telephone operator, waitress, short order cook, cashier. Okay. Honestly, we're in the 21st century. If you're expecting a high function or a low function autistic to basically support themselves on these jobs, unless they're getting government assistance, you must literally be stuck in the 20th century, or you must be over the age of 60, where at one point, or you must be over the age of 50 or 60, where at one point this probably was popular, but this was possible, but that was about 40 years ago when you could probably, work to owning a franchise. Today, unfortunately, even receptionist would be better if you were living with someone and you and that person were both sharing the costs of a house or an apartment. Now, let's go to table two, jobs for good visual thinkers. This gets more into higher education. So, for example, computer programmer, which is what Justin does. Or is, relearning because, he's a web developer and an app developer. Drafting and engineering, another example. Engineering works with a lot of computer-aided design or CAD. I've actually looked at CAD before and played around with it when I was a kid, and actually it was fun because I am a visual person. So you'd probably think one of these two would probably be good for someone like me. Unfortunately, there's a decent math component, and math was probably one of my weakest subjects. True story. Now, you get into commercial art and photography. These are great passions to have. Unfortunately, you can't really pay the bills off of them. You could potentially run a business with them if you're smart. You could eventually aspire to being apprenticed or owning your own business, but you would need a proper mentor for this. Now, get to equipment design, animal trainer, auto mechanic, computer troubleshooter, small appliance, handcraft, lab technician, web page designer, building trades, video game, computer animation, building and factory. Honestly, at this point, what I really believe we should really be doing is asking, a high function or a low function, what they would probably feel more comfortable in, instead of trying to push them into something they're not going to be able to do. Building and maintenance, not everybody likes it. Animation is great, definitely for a visual thinker. Same with video game designer. Building trades, I've said this time and time again, it's probably something I would have done, but it's just like with college. If you cannot learn the basics of what you are doing in the building trades, like welding, probably isn't going to be the best career path for you. Same goes with web developer or computer programming, since it's very heavy with math and sciences. Same with lab technicians or handcrafts, and computer troubleshooting. But computers are unfortunately the wave of the future, no matter how you look at it. And these are jobs that we should really be training people for, or making sure they get incorporated into other parts of life. Now we go to table three, non-visual thinkers jobs. Computer programming comes up again. Then you got a copy editor, Bank teller, honestly, bank teller is probably not going to be for everyone unless you have really strong math skills. Same with telemarketing, not everyone likes this. Statistician and mathematician, unless you're really, 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 really talented with math, probably not the best area. Might be decent for a low function if they have the grades. Telemarketing is just like customer service or retail, not good fits, especially now because the wages aren't that great. Lab technician at, you know, lab technician and engineering, your math and sciences, i.e., STEM, are going to have to be stronger. All right. And the final table, nonverbal people with autism or people with poor verbal skills. So, in this category of jobs, most of these jobs are honestly just not going to pay a decent living either, but they're around for a reason. Maybe if you're young, if you're living with your parents, or you're older and you're living with your parents, or you have a wife or a wife or husband that's incredibly supportive, these are probably good. Funny enough, I've done plenty of jobs with data entry, and this could be considered a weak job for somebody like me, but data entry is unfortunately all different. It's not always numbers. Data entry could be, entering name, date, or stuff like I do in my day-to-day life at my jobs. Same with printing and copy shop. So the guest today is Christina Farinaucci Roberts, who will hopefully be on in a few minutes. And I hope you all learned something from the intro of this, which is a little bit of a reaction to autism. I also hope you learned you like my sports reaction, because I'll be doing more, reaction types videos like this. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, that should be fun. Give yourself 5 to 10 minutes.
is the best pizza in Westchester County? Down here in downtown Yonkers, the Yonkers Brewing Company at one of our weekly live music events. Let's go inside and ask some people and see what the best pizza is. What's your favorite pizza in Westchester? Pizza Palace in Yonkers. What's your favorite pizza in Westchester County? Tommy's Mount Vernon. What's the best pizza in Westchester County? Hello, Pizza is probably like one of the best. What's your favorite pizza in Westchester County? I'm gonna have to say Lucy's Pizza in Austin. Gourmet Pizza in Westchester. What's the best pizzeria in Westchester County? Gino's Pizzeria.
You can compare my Porto team with Liverpool. You can compare because the qualities of the players are there. Was my best team in defensive transition. We lose the ball, we bite like mad dogs, and we recover the ball after 2 seconds. In Real Madrid, I had my best team in direct counter-attack because I had young Di Maria, young Ronaldo, young Higuain, and young Benzema. We killed everybody in offensive transition. And in Inter, I had my best team in a defensive low block, where people like Materazzi, Samuel, Lucio, Cordova, in a low block, you can be there 5 hours and you don't concede a goal. You can compare my Porto team. You can compare my
This month, the Tasca Kia of White Plains, you can make a bold impression in the 20s. Jose Mourinho is no longer.
So the primary care is fuck specialists are going to be expensive. Oh, yeah. Well, this is going to be fun. Wait, 29. How much did he say? Ugh. Whatever. It's fine. She's a kid. Okay. anything about Hold on, I got it. You in? Ah, good. Perfect. All right, you're in, right? Yeah, just the audio got to get up. You in? Okay, so just give me 1 second. Let me just pull the questionnaire up. All right. All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back to Pick Your Brains podcast. So tonight I'm going to be welcoming somebody who's in education, who's been in the realm of the primary education sector. As of now, she runs a consultancy with it. She runs a consultancy, and she's had a very interesting career. Let's welcome Christina to the show today. How are you?
I am blessed and highly favored. How are you?
How's the snow?
It's upstate New York, so it snowed and
Tell
we
us
didn't.
how far upstate for those who are going to be
I am in the Albany capital region area. So it was only, I think it was like maybe 4 inches or something, but it was enough that we could go sledding. It was an impromptu play date out at the elementary school. And I just want to note that I won for the furthest sled into the parking lot. I made it the farthest.
I have not gone on a sled since the 1990s. Oh, geez.
Well, you don't know what you're missing.
Well, then again, also, we'll get into other parts of that during this, but unfortunately, that part of my life where I would have hoped to have been married by now didn't happen just yet.
You have plenty of time.
Yeah, everyone says that, but we'll touch on that anyway. Okay. So my first question for you is this. I believe on one of your Facebook posts, if I remember correctly, you mentioned you had a Korean mother, correct?
I do indeed.
So what is the other half of your mix?
I am half Korean and half Italian. 50-50 right down the middle. My dad is 100% Italian American. My mom is 100% Korean.
Okay. And then the other popular thing, even though I know this drives people a little bit nuts, since you are Korean, do you identify more as Asian or more as woman of color? Just out of curiosity. I saw this as a post also.
Yeah, I identify, I feel like, with both equally. One just gets a little more specific, but yeah, Asian, woman of color, biracial. I embrace and accept them all.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now that we cleared that one, what did you originally decide you wanted to do when you became a child? Not when you became a child, when you were a child? Did you want to be a teacher or had you envisioned doing something else?
So I had a few different things I wanted to be growing up. Teacher was one of the very first ones. I also played around with the idea of being a lawyer and a fashion designer. But ultimately, by the time I finished high school, before I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be not just a teacher, not just an English teacher, not just a high school English teacher, but a high school English teacher in Brooklyn, like very specific.
Oh, interesting, because I know that we'll touch on because there's a lot of different thought with New York City, but that's for a little bit later. Now, it's actually interesting. I will tell you in the audience a little bit of a funny story about myself. Guess what I originally wanted to do, and one question. Do we put you in the Gen X category, which is 1965 to 1980? Do we put you on the cusp with millennials, where millennials are?
I am a 1980 baby. So I am the tail end of Gen X, and there is a micro generation referred to as Zennials.
That's me also, 1985.
It's I thought it was 77 to 82.
No, they expanded at 77 to 85. You could technically sort of consider me a millennial, but when I worked in the Hastings-on-Hudson Central Union Free School District, It was funny. The security guard who used to be a Yonkers police officer, who's also a Gen Xer, actually said to me, you 1981 to 1985 millennials are actually the better part of the generation, because
very
everything else
interesting.
after your year, 1985, goes downhill.
Okay. I feel very in a sweet spot with my 1980. I feel like I
Yeah, no.
really hit the jackpot on that one.
And I was lucky because in some ways it could be argued when you go below my year, everyone, 1985 sort of could be still, considered tied to the older way, but we're also sort of in between because we can adopt to technology, but we're not as technology proficient as, somebody born in
I like to
1990.
joke that I was born in 1980, but I might as well be 80 years old when it comes to technology. And that's probably that's a little ageist because there's probably 80-year-olds who are better at technology than me, but all things being equal.
I'm okay with it. All right. So now that we have that, okay. My career path, originally what I wanted to do was I wanted to be a video film television producer when I was a kid. That dream lasted up until 2006 when WCC didn't have enough of a curriculum, so I switched over to marketing. Just for purposes of graduating. When I left Mercy College in 2000, when I left for Mercy College in 2009, which is now rebranded as Mercy University, I had to change my major again, and it was to business administration, sports management, because sports management, in a lot of ways, actually has a lot of creative ties to the media. Unfortunately, I didn't end up in going down that career path because little too tricky, and you needed to do a lot of networking and know a lot of people in bigger places. So take a wild guess a decade later where I just ended up back in, ironically, doing this podcasting, which is part of the entertainment media film production, whatchamacallit. So it's kind of funny. That was my dream as a kid. I got taken away from it. I was all over the place, and then I ended up doing this all over again, now when we got locked down for COVID.
Yeah, I love that. You came full circle.
Only because I realized you kind of have to do something for yourself at some point. That's also going to be touched on today. So, all right. Now that we have that, hold on. That's why. Now that we have that established, okay. What was the first? Remind me what the first school you taught at was, and what subjects were you teaching?
Well, technically, my first school was in Korea. I taught in Korea. I taught 5th and 6th grade at the Albany Christian Academy. But my first official teaching job in the States was with Teachers Preparatory School in Brownsville, New York. Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York.
Brownsville, Brooklyn. Okay, so you actually got to live that part of, sort of being in Brooklyn. What drew you to want to go to the city?
So I had a cousin who was a few years older than me that attended Pratt Institute, the art school in Bed-Stuy, and I visited him in high school, and I just fell in love with Brooklyn, the culture. And I definitely had this sense of wanting to be able to, what do you call it? I wanted to be able to make a difference, and I wanted to be in a community that was more high needs, and I wanted to be able to basically make a bigger impact. And so that is what drew me to Brooklyn. I had also I think Dangerous Minds was out around that time with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah,
So I
because
think that
I saw clips of that movie, and it's funny because I was born in 85, and I do remember that movie. That was Michelle, what was her name?
Pfeiffer.
That was Michelle Pfeiffer, right, where she taught at the inner city school?
Yeah.
Gangster's Paradise was the popular song. Very oddly
Coolio,
enough.
yes.
No, but it's funny because as soon as you mention Dangerous Minds, there's always the connection that the trailer for that, released in the 90s, happened to have that very popular rap song that everybody
Yes.
And yes, appropriately enough, because it is, from Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is one of the boroughs where you had a lot of
Yes.
creative rappers, it sort of made sense. Brings me to my next interesting question, because I've seen this name post a lot before and collaborate with a few different people on a couple social media platforms. But the person I'm about to mention, I'm pretty sure you probably met, Nadia Lopez, award-winning
Yes.
author.
Yes. I mean, I have not physically met her, but we have virtually met. And yes, I am very aware of her. And she's an amazing, amazing human and an amazing leader.
So I'm not going to personally knock what she and everybody does within the DEI realm, but I'm going to raise 2 points because I raised this to a social worker. I have 2 problems with DEI. Two of which have nothing to actually do with the education aspect of it. It's more in the corporate world.
Okay.
Firstly, and I actually had my guest on Sunday, who's a Caribbean social worker from Grenada, even said it herself. First problem is within DEI, there's not enough representation for people who are neurodivergents or people on the autistic spectrum. And a lot of the people who are within the DEI realm apparently seem to be very weak in this area. I don't know if you ran across that, during your time in education, but my biggest thing with them is that's a whole nother group that would also like to be able to, have some advocacy tailored toward them. Do you believe as far as overseeing a special education department, during your time as a leader and a teacher, that you would agree that more needs to be done for us? Or have there been more advances made since I left high school in 2004?
I would say I'm sure there's been more advances since you've graduated, and I would argue I'm sure there's more to be done, right? There's more to be done in really anything. I mean, I think your statement is a little bit broad in terms of what issue you're taking with DEI as a whole. I mean, diversity, equity,
DEI as a whole are actually great initiatives. I think my issue with it is how the corporate world uses it, which is they're not using it for the right reasons.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a lot of people that are approaching it from a more compliance driven or just wanting to look good on paper or avoid getting canceled or whatever it may be. But I think that as I actually do believe neurodivergence is starting to make more of is getting more of a spotlight these days in the same ways that mental health has gotten a boost in the public dialogue around issues that are happening. I think
because it had to start with mental health. And my actual issue with that discussion was we should have been having this discussion in the 90s, but you couldn't have this discussion in the 90s or 2000s. Honestly, and I've told a few people this, especially on the show as I've been doing it, and in a few separate my last 2 social work guests, I literally said this conversation needed to happen in the 90s or the 2000s, but guess what everybody's first thought process was about people who were, quote, have Asperger's syndrome, or what we are now calling autism or neurodivergence. And I brought an article today that we're going to probably incorporate some parts of, throughout the discussion of your life and what have you. Basically, autism or Asperger's syndrome, and this is in the community that I went to, and I hold no grudge against them, but it was completely ignorant statement to make back in the 2000s, 2004s, around that time. They thought Asperger's syndrome meant I was mentally retarded.
Yeah.
And I'm not even going to sit here and say I was traumatized for hearing that. I look back at it years later, I'm like, why do people correlate autism to being mentally retarded, where you're thinking of the movie that was done called A Beautiful Mind, with
Mhm.
Russell Crowe, and it was about John Nash. But John
Mhm.
Nash himself, because my mother took me to that movie,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you saw that movie too back in the early 2000s. He was a paranoid schizophrenic. These are
Mm,
completely different.
right.
And
Right.
even my diagnosis was a complete mess when I was a kid,
Right.
because you mentioned to me you have ADHD, right?
Mm,
My diagnosis was severe ADHD and mild autism.
mhm.
But somehow, the way it's looked at is in the field that I work in, supposedly some people might have very higher symptoms of ADHD and need medication, but I
Sure.
don't believe that medication is always the answer for everybody in management of
Agreed.
ADHD and
Agreed.
Asperger's syndrome.
Yeah.
And yet, ironically, I work in that field, but I think every case of ADHD is different.
Sure. Definitely. Definitely. The way it presents itself, the way it manifests. Um, yes, you're accurate.
Only because I learned how to manage it over time,
Sure.
but I also remembered one thing that most other people don't. It's how you, I'm not going to say channel it. I put it like this with ADHD and Asperger's syndrome, and I said this on LinkedIn even. It's,
Mhm.
we have passions. We just
Mhm.
need outlets to be able to utilize those passions. Just like if you go look at
Sure.
Hollywood, for example, most of those people are, even Elon Musk, are undiagnosed.
Mhm.
Everyone
Mhm.
knows Elon Musk has autism or Asperger's syndrome, but the fact that he's a complete crazy person overtakes that. I had another word I wanted to use, but I don't want to use it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like we don't need to I wouldn't call him crazy because I feel like that is also maybe a little bit derogatory, but I mean, he's operating on a different
Okay, he's
system.
out there.
He's out there. And I think, yeah, there's some crazy statistic on even entrepreneurship. I think it's like somewhere high 30% or low 40% of entrepreneurs have ADHD. I think that makes a lot of sense because
Well, when you take somebody with autism, or in your case ADHD, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think this will definitely make for an interesting part in the recording. Trying to have us work a career like everybody else, I've honestly realized it's not the best fit for every autistic.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, you want me to act like this is the still the 20th century where you can fit me into a job
Mhm.
where, honestly, even most of the time, whether it was a warehouse, I can't stay put sometimes. It's not my
Mhm.
fault. It's just, the way, it's just the
You're
way
wired.
work is structured. Work
Sure.
is not structured for people like you and me, the way it should be. I'm sure for Troy City, where you were able to obtain, becoming a principal, probably maybe that was a little bit of a better suit than being a better fit than being a teacher. Would you agree or disagree?
No, for me, no. I think that in reflecting on how I function differently as an entrepreneur than I did as a principal or even a teacher is I actually thrive in structure to keep because my natural default is all over the place. In And I didn't realize that as much until I got out of the school districts because in a school there is a very regimented calendar, there are very regimented structures and details and deadlines, and so when I'm given those parameters, I know where I have to stay within those parameters. It actually was able to focus me and allow me to achieve what I was setting out to achieve. as an entrepreneur, I have to rein myself in, and that's where things can get a little
Well, you also
a little
have a
more
little
wild.
you also have a little one right now, and then there are times that you have to also be focused on, being able to make money. That's the other part.
Sure, yeah. I
Because
am
that's the part
a
about entrepreneurship. We all crave wanting to be entrepreneurs, but then when we finally start it, we see it's about a kind of a delicate balance.
oh yeah, it's a constantly spinning those plates and trying to keep
So
everything going.
when you oversaw special education, what level were you teaching? Were you teaching high school or middle school?
So I've generally primarily been in high school, although I did middle school too. And when I was a teacher, I didn't oversee special education. I had a co-teacher, so I had a sped teacher with me in some of my classes for the classes where we had both gen ed students and special ed students in a mixed class. And then as a principal, I was not necessarily the direct overseer of SPED. There's usually somebody who is in charge of that piece, and then I'm just kind of making sure that they're on top of it. But they were definitely the expert in that area.
Oh, and I'm sure they definitely dealt with every part of the spectrum within the special education realm, because it's funny. My IEP, I still have parts of it that follow me throughout my adult life. But
Yeah.
when I was in school, it got modified at different junctures. But I always like to tell this story. Sometimes I've sort of told it on LinkedIn. I did tell it on Facebook. But when they diagnosed me at 4 years old, they literally didn't even think I would be able to literally graduate high school or even go to college, which I don't know what your data points were with that diagnosis back in the 1990s.
Sure.
Clearly, the district that I went to, which is Katona Lewisboro, was a good district that they did get me out of there. The only thing that I would say, I wish they could have prepared me better for it, but they wouldn't have known this before 2008. Wasn't so much a trade, but things like BOCES should have been looking 15 years down the line at what careers could have been, because BOCES, when we were growing up, the biggest problem was you had to choose literally retail or manual trade, and that's not a fit for everyone.
Sure. And that has definitely evolved since your time. Because I actually have a BOCES as a client, and I'm very aware of the types of programming that they have available to students.
What have they added? Because I did take a look at BOCES within the last 7 years myself, just to kind of see what they had added. Did they add more like coding and stuff?
Yeah, there's definitely more coding and tech. There's culinary, there's hospitality.
Culinary was the one I didn't want to do, but it was more because of nights and weekends. I mean, if I had to go back to high school now, knowing what I know, I probably would have gone to IT or something like that. But I even didn't want to do that back in the 2000s, because along with culinary, those two were like, it was going to be nights and weekends. But when I look at it now, I'm like, yeah, but if I already have a problem making under 50,000 and that's over 50,000, maybe I should have thought about it like that, from the salary aspect, since that's the other thing, because some of my decisions back then may have made sense back then, but if I look at it now, they don't make sense.
Sure.
So, all right, I don't know if you were familiar with this article, but I've used this a lot throughout the podcast, and I may write my own version of it. Are you familiar with indiana.edu?
Maybe.
I'll link the article to you after this, but basically It's geared to parents. Choosing the right job for people with autism or Asperger's syndrome. It was done at the Indiana Resource Center for Autism. So I'm
Okay.
thinking that was probably Indiana University. They break
Probably,
the
yeah.
article down into 4 categories of jobs that are good for different levels of autism. For example, Table 1. I'm sure you would agree to disagree with me or agree with me on these categories, but let's start with Table 1.
Okay.
Bad jobs for people with high function autism, which is in my case. Cashier, short order cook, waitress, casino dealer, taxi dispatcher, oral dictation, airline ticket agent, future market trader, air traffic controller, receptionist.
Does it say why?
It gives little examples why, like, for example, cashier. Making change quickly puts too much demand on short-term working memory.
Mm-hmm.
Which I could completely see that because I've worked in retail, and honestly, it's not suited to somebody like me. But
Yeah.
my argument with retail is the wages are bad.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, because I think our country is behind in some leadership areas, they still, and by a century, they still think these jobs are suited for people like me, and they're not.
Okay. That's fair.
Short order cook. Yeah, that one have to keep track record of many orders. I could see where that one, whatchamacallit. Casino dealer, you probably got to be really, really, really good with math.
Mm-hmm.
Math was one of my weaker areas.
Okay.
So that would also apply over to future market trader. I did a little recording of reactions of this before you came on, and even receptionist and telephone operator. It's a lot to remember because you're doing a lot of transferring, and this is from what I do daily in my work, which is a scheduler. It's unfortunately, it's a lot of fast thinking. It gets annoying after a while, especially when you don't know how to help, patients. Table 2 would be visual jobs. So the bigger standout in this one, because it comes up a third or fourth time, computer programming. Computer programming, if you're strong in STEM, I can see that, which is science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah.
But not everyone is unfortunately good with math. I don't know. How are you with math?
I made it to calculus in high school, but I really stopped paying attention then. So I
was in remedial.
I did not take any math classes after high school.
I was in remedial. Do you want to know why college took me so long? Math 116 and me are not best friends.
Got you, yeah.
I like to say that one. I like to say Benjamin and math were not good together because Benjamin's creative, unfortunately, and creativity, unfortunately, means you're not going to be strong in those 2 areas, even though those 2 areas, ironically, the salaries are better.
Sure.
So commercial art and photography were interesting to me. I mean, you can't necessarily support yourself off of it, but they are passions that people can center a business around or, build something on the side. And photography, which gets into TV, it'll obviously depend.
Yeah.
Now, if you're an animal person, veterinary technician is a good one. Web designer and video game designer and computer animation fall back into the programming realm. But then the last one I'll point out on this, building maintenance and trades. Unfortunately, I like to say this one, especially because this ties to education, and you may agree with me on this because I made this argument several times last decade. I could have done a trade, but the issue with trades for somebody on autism is the same as going to college. If you can't grasp the basics of what you're learning, you can also tie this over to taking a dance class. It's probably not going to be bestly suited for you. And that's how it is with trades. Trades is good for people who are interested, like working with their hands or doing like construction type of work, but it's not best for everybody. And especially once you reach your 30s, because we have this big problem now in this country where people over 40 are still working in trades, it's not good for your body.
Right.
That's the thing about trades that nobody gets when they're talking about that advice. Reasonable for when you're in your 20s because your body can recover, but once you hit your 30s, I already got lower back pain after working, what you would call it for 5 years and then sitting down for 3.
Yeah.
It's age. It happens. I learned all this after working in an orthopedic physical medicine office, which doesn't matter how old you are. Your body's going to start breaking down at some point.
Sure.
I see it happen to all ages. So the last two tables, were interesting. I mean, good jobs for non-visual thinkers, like accounting and programming, which are very math heavy. Journalist, copy editor, journalist, for example, if you're very accurate with facts, and some people are. The issue with me was I always had very weak English grammar skills, but they got better now because we have more modern. My writing looks more presentable now, really thanks to modern AI tools.
Sure.
And I'm not talking ChatGPT. I'm talking my phone has Grammarly. I have to make sure when I'm at work that, for acting like a secretary, that everything is grammar checked because, we're working with boomers, and who were the biggest grammar Nazis? Our parents.
Yeah. I was too, because I was an English teacher,
But that's understandable. You were an English teacher. That's something that had to get better year after year after year. But luckily, because of the advancements with, things like Grammarly, at least now I can write, in a much better tone. But I always like to say it. Text message ruined me at a certain point. All right. And the last table, these were jobs that I guess are good for somebody who just wants a job. Like, for example, factory assembly work, janitor, stuff like that. So I like this article, and I'm probably going to rewrite it in my own, through my own eyes. But yeah. So let's see. What do I want to ask you next? Okay. Albany Charter School. So you've worked at a charter school and you've worked at a public school. Would you tell me the differences between the two of them and which you felt served the students better?
So this is a question that I've often been asked. So the majority of my career, I want to make this clarification. Traditional district schools and charter schools are all public schools. They are publicly funded.
Can I tell you something very interesting between you and me?
Sure.
When I've argued this with stupid people, I had a friend that I cut off last year who used to say charter schools are better. I'm like, it's no different. It's basically still funded by the public and tax dollars. It's just done differently.
So I don't think you can make a blanket statement about either being better than the other. The reality is there are really great traditional district schools and there are really crappy ones. There are really great charter schools and there are really crappy charter schools, right? So you have to judge and evaluate each school by the fruit that it bears, by the outcomes that it gets. Oftentimes I think the opponents of charter schools will try to say charter schools, they cherry pick, they steal money from traditional district schools, and then those schools are left, without the resources they need to get better. And I don't think that's very accurate. So, again, the majority of my career was with traditional district schools. I only had one experience, which was my last leadership experience was in the charter world. So I can honestly say that to me, when I worked for an independent charter school, which is different than, say, a charter management organization that runs almost like a district, but and there are for-profit ones and there are not-for-profit ones. So I think a lot of people talk about the for-profit charters as if most charters are for-profit.
That's probably the one. Now, you're right. I probably made too blanket a statement, but the other analogy I like to use was, I think it's more. No, what was the analogy I used to like to use? Oh, okay. What matters at the end of the education is were kids passing standardized tests? Because not everyone was a standardized test taker. Because I almost feel like with charter school or public school, I would probably be learning the same stuff, in a charter that I did in
the difference, I'd say the major difference is that so theoretically charter schools were created to become almost like lab schools where you could try things out because they didn't have all of the constraints that a traditional district school would have, usually due to things like a teachers union, right? That says you're not going to make us do more than X number of hours a day. We're not going to be required to do extra things with the kids or, things like that.
Charter and public schools, I think the reason most people get testy about it, though, was because of what you just mentioned right there. Classic school districts answer to the teachers union, and unfortunately, let's be honest about something. I think the reason most people probably just have a hard time understanding it, the media interpretation of it, is because the media skews everything regardless. But the media skews a lot, but with a charter public, it's really because some people, felt the teachers union sets the standards. And there's nothing wrong with the teachers union, by the way, because I worked in a classic school district with the teachers union. I never had anything against them, even though I was, just the monitor. It's just the difference between them and me was their pay rates were better.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, again, with charter schools, they have an exchange of autonomy for accountability. So in a charter school, you have greater autonomy. You get to do things maybe that a traditional district school wouldn't get to do. But the flip side of that is you have greater accountability. You have a charter in place that says you're going to meet certain standards. And if you don't meet those standards, guess what? You don't get to stay open. Whereas you have traditional district schools that can have abysmal graduation rates, attendance
but
rates.
They're still going to receive funding.
And they're going to stay open for, decades before something gets shut down. So
that gets into a whole different political argument, because that's where it gets too political, and I think a lot of people get turned off.
So what I'm saying, though, is that is essentially the most major distinction is that a charter school will have greater autonomy to try to innovate. But on the flip side, they will have greater accountability. So they get measured on average every 5 years to see if they're hitting what they need to be hitting and if they're making sufficient progress.
No, they're still evaluated by the Department of Education.
They are evaluated by their authorizer, which can be in New York State, there's the Charter School Institute, there's New York State Education Department, and there's also a New York City, a one for New York City as well. I believe there's 3 in New York State, but it's different in every single state. And so every authorizer has a set of standards that need, that they're, and metrics that schools need to meet. And so that's my take. I think that you have to just essentially assess each school, whether it's a traditional district school, whether it's a charter school, based on what are the outcomes they're getting for kids.
Okay. And it's funny because if I go back to, like I said, I'm going to circle back to my comment about if I could go back to being 18 years old. If I could go back to 18 years old with what I knew now, I could probably say this. I don't blame my old traditional school district. The education was useful for other things in my life.
Sure.
I had one of the friends that I cut off last year used to like to place the blame on the traditional classic district because it wasn't specialized enough. Mm-hmm. But I think what he doesn't want to admit is that the working world didn't really know how to work with me or what, is best for my abilities. And that's why, unfortunately, why I ended up now in podcasting is a couple different things. We'll finish up with entrepreneurship and what your consultancy is all about. But basically, I'm going into what we call my own type of a consultancy as well. I actually have a friend who's asking me to create training for her therapists for 3 different levels of people with autism.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I want to do some level of a consultancy also, but it's going to be under a registered media company because I feel more people can relate along with the podcast videos and other types of, media that I can write and create and learn from it more than just being, what is it? Sort of like a hybrid media, a consultancy that's a consultancy or media company that sells educational products, not like trying to do a whole complicated educational company. I thought of that.
Sure.
But anyway, back in the 2000s, I feel like there wasn't a lot done, or there should have been more done, but some of it would have also had to have been my parents looking, decade ahead. I can't blame them because now I'm an adult. And the other thing is because the system in this country has effectively not put me in the best situations or type of roles that I would like to do, which has become agree to disagree with some of my friends. I now end up doing this as a way to help. Okay, yeah, 10 minutes. I now see this as a way to educate, corporations because they don't. I feel like they're too stuck in our parents' generation in terms of things, and they just don't, there's not enough modern understanding of everything.
Okay.
But all right, tell me about what your consultancy does.
So, I basically work with 3 buckets of clientele. I do corporate consulting, where we focus on, I would say, holistic and human-centered leadership development, and specifically through what we call a wide lens, where we integrate wellness, inclusion, diversity, and equity to promote greater individual and organizational flourishing. My second group would be other educators, so principals, superintendents. I help advise them on their equity and excellence for all initiatives, support them with strategic planning, leadership development, and professional development for teachers, sometimes curriculum reviews, data analysis, that kind of thing. And then my third bucket of clientele are actually other entrepreneurs, and now I've also sort of started to incorporate some more grassroots nonprofit leaders in my what I call my fortune framework from reverie to revenue suite of offers, which is basically getting into signature framework development, intellectual capital creation, and proprietary method monetization. So basically, how do you leverage your intellectual capital over your human capital to create a more scalable and sustainable business?
So my trainings are going to be sort of, for therapists, it's going to be all 3 age groups, which are young children, teenagers, and adults, on how to work with each of them and how to properly help parents gain a better understanding of that. That would be grouping 1. Grouping 2 is going to be teachers, people who've been in the education sector. So I would definitely show you some of what I'm doing, which is going to be geared toward that, because we're going to do panel discussion later this year, probably on education, which I'm going to invite you back to. And I have 3 friends who I graduate who are 1 year older than me, who are all teachers that are also going to possibly become these vendors because they openly discuss mental health. And then my last one I do is corporate, because unfortunately, I think corporate's the most difficult one nowadays, Fortune 500 companies, where they honestly need the most understanding, as we're passing the baton from boomers now down to Gen X and millennials. So that would be you and me. Basically, we're the next 2 generations, and I do believe Gen X has a little bit more sympathy, but within my generation, and I love my generation, I'm just going to leave on this.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still a lot of understanding from my generation and age group that has to start improving more for people like me to be able to actually get more opportunities in this world.
Sure, sure.
So thank you for stopping by today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad we could have this conversation. Could you share your framework with me afterwards, so I could see what it looks like?
Absolutely. And actually, if you go to my Instagram, it's at Grace, Grit, and Glory.
Why don't you put that into my LinkedIn after this, the Instagram link?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. And there's a whole little link tree, and you can download the free checklist. There is a video you can watch from that checklist. And then if there are additional supports that you want, that it tells you which product would make the most sense.
Okay, that I'm gonna probably build something up with Instagram eventually as well.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming by. You know,
thank you.
It's the extra time beforehand, was beneficial to me because I got to record something separate. And
Right.
we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Have a beautiful and blessed balance of your day. Bye-bye now.
You too. Bye.